Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. 4 young people, 20, 21 years old, stricken down in a horrible attack in Moscow, Idaho, November 13th, 2022. Brian Kohberger, the defendant, stands accused in and out of court. The judge imposes a gag order. The attorneys, both the defense attorney and the prosecutor, file motions and argue to keep cameras out. What's going on here? What's going on in this case?
Hi, I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
Today we're going to be discussing the Kohberger case, keeping cameras out of the courtroom, and what we know so far.
Well, it seems like we're going along and learning less and less as we go along because, as I stated in the intro, not only is there a gag order in the court, but now they are arguing whether to even allow televised hearings and trial. And I don't know, to me, I don't know how you feel about it, but to me, that's a real abuse of the public dedication that people have to their jobs and to the court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think generally in this podcast, we try to show things from 2 different angles, but it's even hard for me to kind of be like any centrist about this, because when it comes to the laws and what, is being established as precedent and things like that, we have this technology now, which obviously didn't exist 100 years ago, but these are the tools that we have to get an accurate representation of what's happening, what's being presented. And I understand that, media involvement can sometimes issue conflicts, like we saw, like Johnny Depp, Amber Heard became a huge sensation, and you're taking reality and kind of turning it into like reality TV. So obviously there's problems in that regard. But I think it's really important for people to have kind of documentation of what's happening. And I think being able to see it with your own eyes is infinitely more valuable and tells an infinitely wider story than just having it on paper.
Well, we're going to illustrate it a little bit further in what happens when the courts do not want to allow cameras in. But first, let's talk more about that issue. My feeling is very strong. People pay taxes. Those taxes build courthouses and pay for the judges and all the staff in the courthouse. And so it's really our process. And I think that people have an absolute right to follow these trials. There are problems. I'll talk about those in a couple of minutes, and we'll see what the judge himself has to say about that. But the courthouse has always in Americana been a central part of the community. I mean, there's the church, there's the town hall, and there's the courthouse. And in the old days, people actually did go and watch trials. If you watch some of the old TV shows, Perry Mason, et cetera, the public was highly concerned about what was going on, and people actually went to the courtrooms. Well, society's a lot more complicated now, and people, are working, and people have kids that they have to cart around. Not that they didn't have kids before, but we have a lot more stressors in our lives now, and people do rely on the media. And so my really strong conviction, if you haven't figured it out by now, is that these things should be public. Now, both the defense attorney who represents Brian Kohberger and even the prosecution have argued in court that they do not want cameras in the trial. They've pointed out some problems. And the judge himself indicated that he is reluctant. There are problems. And why don't we let the judge is his name, actually. Why don't we let him speak for himself?
In this particular case, we have a lot of interest, and we have a lot of people that you can't control, that your clients can't control, and they are putting out stuff that is harmful. And it's not necessarily the camera people, okay? It's where that film goes and how it is manipulated and how people are, commentators, how they talk about it, okay? How they explain it. And a lot of times it is not very accurate.
What the judge is saying there is that he has concerns And he's not faulting the people that are actually doing the videography in the courtroom so much as what happens to it in the editorial staff, and later on when it's kind of spun in the editorial area. Before I make a couple of my observations about all of that, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a bad look for him. I understand his concern, to a level. It's like ironic because it seems to a degree that the people that he's speaking out about is like literally us, like podcasters, like entertainers, and he's trying to distinguish like this isn't entertainment, like this is a serious issue. But at the same time, there's better ways to go around it. And I think even if like say there's like a delay in media, that's reasonable, but I don't think, because his complaint is, oh, well, they spin it in a way that's not accurate. At the end of the day, that's why it's important to have this accurate representation here that people can access. In my opinion, I think that, the media can do whatever it wants with anything, but that goes with just anything.
Here's one of the things that I noticed about that, and I go before judges all the time, and I don't want a judge to be watching this and penalize me for my thoughts. But my opinion is that on the one hand, this particular judge indicated that the OJ trial 30 years ago was a circus. And then on the other hand, he said, well, the media has changed in the last 10 years. So which is it? If the OJ case turned into a circus, in my opinion, it wasn't the people that were manning the cameras so much as the courtroom decorum wasn't observed, probably by the judge himself. Judge Lance Ito was the judge in that case, and he certainly allowed the attorneys a little bit more latitude than probably should have been allowed. But I'm not a judge. I know it's not easy to control what attorneys do, and you don't want to, as a judge, you don't want to come down on them too hard, because then there are issues for appeal. But that's one of the things that struck me. The other thing that struck me is that, you don't want stuff to get spun around. Well, if you don't allow people to see exactly and precisely what is happening in the courtroom, they're going to make stuff up. That's just how I feel.
Exactly. Yeah. And you said exactly what I was thinking with the OJ case, where when he starts talking about it, the way that it comes off is I don't want people coming after my ass. And with peace and love, obviously, to any judges that Andrew might appear in front of, we love you guys. But, I think obviously, there is respect in not wanting to be televised, not wanting to be this sensational thing. But like you said, it's just if we're going to have accurate representation, we need to be able to have accurate representation. Anybody's going to tell any story they want. Hiding the facts isn't going to change the fact that people are going to keep talking about this. It is hard when you have people like a jury that are supposed to be making decisions independently based on the court, and then they have access to these types of things. But at the end of the day, newspapers exist. Things spread really fast on social media, but I don't really think that it's fair to basically imply that the outside world is going to have place here. I think, things are should be handled professionally. And then I think if anything beyond that, I think people are smart enough to be able to sometimes tell when things are being manipulated. But either way, having the full access to just the raw footage, I think, is really important in determining things like that.
One of the things that one of the attorneys had said was they were concerned that with the cameras in the courtroom, people would see their notes. Well, you know what? Let's take a look at if I can still get her on here. Here is the attorney, Wendy Olson, who's arguing in court that she wants the cameras out of there. I mean, she wants the cameras in the courtroom. She represents a consortium of media people. And one of the attorneys for Mr. Kohberger said, well, I don't want the cameras in the court because they might see my notes and know my trial strategy. Well, look right now. Do you see what is written on her notes there?
all white.
It's all white. You can see maybe there's a couple of pictures there, but and look at the Kohberger is over on the left-hand side there with his attorneys. The one on the right was the one that said, well, he didn't want the cameras because they might show his notes. Well, can you see what's on his notes?
No, and even then, it's just like, if you don't want people to see your notes, hide your notes better. Like, facing away from the cameras, like, you're being dramatic.
So that was, I think the legitimate concerns are that the attorneys might make a show of it. But I've tried cases in the state and federal courts in 2 different states. And when I'm trying a case, there's a certain level of nervousness. And I think any experienced trial attorney will tell you the same thing, even if they've tried a million cases or they brag that they've tried a million cases. There's a certain level of nervousness that goes into it. You're in front of a judge, you're in front of a jury, you're concerned about how you're presenting the case, and you're trying to figure out if the judge and the jury are listening to you and whether they're getting it. And that is my concern, is always, I'm following my outline, but things never go exactly the way you plan them in a trial. And you're always thinking, is this going my way? What's the next question I'm going to ask the witness? Oh, wait a minute. That's not right. I have to be listening to what the witness says. So your mind is on about 40 different channels, the least of which is, oh, I'm going to play to the cameras. Now, there may have been some abuse in some cases, like the OJ case, which is 30 years ago. But I think judges have been fairly savvy about it. And I'd like to hear, I've watched a couple of the big trials lately, like the Alex Murdaugh trial and the Letitia Stock trial. And you were talking about the Johnny Depp trial. I would love to have the judge, contact them and see what their impressions were, because in the Murdaugh trial, for example, they had certain evidence which was not to be shown to the public. And that was effectuated. And of course, there were never any shots of the jury in that case. Enough about the jury, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's quickly review before we discuss the case more. Let's quickly review what this case is all about. There were 4 murder victims. We can't forget that. Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonsalves, they had been friends since the time they were in 6th grade. Then there was Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle, boyfriend and girlfriend. There's Mr. Kohberger. I found it interesting that there he is for the first time. Every time he's gone to court before, he's been in a orange jumpsuit. Here he is. Where did he get the suit?
Gotta keep up appearances.
I guess so. This is the home in which the murders took place after the state law enforcement got done sweeping it and getting everything of value. They were actually going to destroy the place. It was up for demolition, but the defense ran in and said, wait a minute, that's evidence. You can't demolish this. It's evidence. And
so it's ongoing. Yeah.
So it is fenced off, boarded up at this time, and it will be demolished after the trial. Here is Brian Kohberger and his lead attorney, Ann Taylor. I wasn't really sure why there were so many smiles, but there were. This is the judge. His name is actually John Judge. He's the Idaho district judge for that district. Just another picture in the courtroom of all of the attorneys with Mr. Kohberger. I liked this shot. It shows Mr. Kohberger's hands. All of what we've said so far is an allegation. He's alleged. He's entitled to a presumption of innocence. But there's a shot of his hands. This is the attorney that represented a coalition of news media groups that were covering the case. And after the hearing that she went in arguing to allow cameras in the courtroom, the local press spoke to her. There's a gag order in the case, so I guess it doesn't apply to her because she's not directly a party in the case. Here's another picture of her with the local media.
That judge's biggest fear right there was that picture.
Yeah. There's another picture of him, and this just illustrates the fact that they already have cameras in that courtroom, and there's the monitor showing the 2 different views. So the issue isn't whether there will be cameras in the courtroom, but the issue is, whether they'll be allowed to be used in the trial.
And I do want to interrupt quickly
Sure.
to mention because you mentioned the attorneys are concerned about people reading their notes. I don't really know, and maybe it's different because it's not flash photography, but I know there's clothing that celebrities can wear to kind of block cameras from seeing them. That's like a new technology being developed. So I wouldn't be too surprised if there's like stuff that you can do on paper with that either.
Wait, I've never heard of that. What are you talking about? What is this clothing that they wear? It covers the what?
It's just I think it only works specifically with flash photography, but if you try to take a picture, I think they're trying to develop ones that don't work with, like, it's just any that disrupts any technological imaging, but they have clothing that if a flash is taken, it just blacks out your picture basically. So when celebrities are going out, if paparazzi are taking pictures, until the paparazzi gets back and looks at the pictures, because usually they're just trying to get as many quickly, they'll go back and it's like the person's completely obscured.
Wait a minute, I don't get this. Does it actually cover their face, or does it just cover where they're?
No, it looks like normal clothes. There's like a picture of Paris Hilton like wearing like this giant scarf, and it shows like a before and after with like flash and no flash, and when you take the picture with the flash, she looks just complete, like almost completely black. They're working on stuff like that, so like, if that technology exists, maybe like a little, put something up so they can't see your book.
That's bizarre. That's, the other thing, we're kind of sidetracking from this topic, but, the thing that I've never gotten about these famous people that don't want their pictures taken. Wait a minute. They worked really hard to get fame, and now that they have fame, they don't want it anymore. Now, true, there are excesses. That's absolutely true. I mean, look at what happened to Princess Diana. At the time of her unfortunate, horrible, tragic death, she was running away from paparazzi, allegedly. And so, yeah, there's excesses. But these people that, they worked really hard to become these stars, and all of a sudden they don't want their picture taken.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean, I think like you mentioned with the Princess Diana and like even like Britney back in the early 2000s, where it's kind of hard, especially because we live in New Hampshire versus like Los Angeles. But I can totally see working really hard to be a celebrity. And then in the case of like Britney Spears, where it's like the paparazzi starts to like mob you and it becomes overwhelming, or even just like you feel kind of ugly that day and then you don't want paparazzi taking your picture on your way to Starbucks. So like, I get it.
Yeah. So let's get back to the case and the more serious allegations in the case. In the Kernodles actually had hired a investigator that found out a couple of things. And one of the things that their investigator found was that in the autopsy, no surprise, we already knew that there had been multiple stab wounds, but there were more defensive wounds than had ever been stated before, especially with Xana Kernodle. There was no sexual assault. And so that raised a lot of questions. And both Xana Kernodle's father, Jeff, and her sister said that she was a scrappy girl who always stood up for herself. And, if she had to, she would put up a fight. So the fact that the coroner's defensive wounds were understated or not stated before, that is significant because she would have put up a fight. Mm-hmm. She would have put up a fight. And the two that were there, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, they had to have heard it. In fact, the one, as we all know, according to the probable cause affidavit, she heard things. She thought it was a party. She thought they were playing with the dog. She opened her door 3 times. And the last time she saw this figure dressed in black leaving. Well, then she didn't. The police were not called for 8 hours until, if these murders happened, we believe around 4 o'clock in the morning, more or less. The police weren't called until 11:58, 8 hours later, pretty much. And how is it that there were 2 girls in the apartment and one of them even saw this person? And how is it that apparently there was a fight, according to Xana's father now, and nobody did anything about it? Nobody called the police. The girl was said to just have been in shock, and then she did whatever she did.
Because for 8 hours,
it makes zero sense. There was a case in the news. There have been cases of kids calling 911. There was a case last year where a 6-year-old saw the death of her parent and immediately call. If a 6-year-old knows to call 911 immediate, there's something about this whole story that doesn't make sense. One of the more recent things that came out was that Xana's father said that the doors had number locks on them. And so you would have had to have gone around the back, and whoever came into the building would have had to have known the number. And that re-raises a supposition that had earlier been made that maybe Mr. Kohberger knew the people. Maybe he'd had an event before. The more recent information from Xana's father was that she had a stalker, and maybe one of the other girls had a stalker. So there's all this information that's out there. If the court doesn't want to allow, the machination of the cameras in the courtroom, people are going to find this other stuff. They're just gonna.
And there's a couple of things you touched on. So it's like with, I believe Dylan, where they saw the perpetrator, and the story is that they were standing in the door, and I guess that this person didn't see them or just ignored them and walked by them. I cannot imagine a universe where you see that it's scary enough to freeze you in place, and then you go and proceed to do what for the next 8 hours. Another thing that you mentioned, that you needed a key code to get in, that's an electronic device. So I'm wondering how sophisticated this technology is, and if there's any way to determine the history of who's put in that number for the past 24 hours. Now, I don't really think that the number itself, if it's a college house, is necessarily too hard to come by, because how many times are people going to come over? Oh, this is the number, da 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 da. But at the same time, it's also really interesting. And you mentioned the stalker, something to consider. He's 28 years old. You look at this man; he's a grown ass man. But the other people are young college students in their early 20s. So there's a lot of weirdness with that, where it's how obviously, they're college students, but it's strange that they cross paths, strange to have the number, and strange that we wouldn't know had this lock been accessed.
You want some more weirdness? At one of the pre-trial hearings, there was an expert who testified by the name of Gabriela Vargas. She testified on behalf of the defendant. She's a DNA genealogy expert, and she testified at a hearing. The very next day, she was investigated by the FBI. So, there's a lot of strange undercurrents going on, and the only thing that one can guess is that since there was a gag order, and since they are arguing vociferously against allowing cameras, and that may change, I'm predicting that there will be fireworks at the actual trial, because if we don't know what's going on, I'm predicting that there's a lot of strangeness. That was said to be a party house. People were in and out of there all the time. The police had gone in there at least 3 times in the summer prior to November of 2022 to ask them to turn down the music. So it was a party house. We don't know what happened between the 4 o'clock events and 11:58 when they were reported. But there's one YouTuber out there who has actually had telephone calls from people who said they knew all about the murders that morning, 9 o'clock that morning. They knew about it. There was a buzz on that campus. That's the campus in that area, and people knew that there was something going on. And when the police got there, there were already people in front of the house. So there's something real strange about that 8-hour period of time that went by between the murders and the time that the police were notified. And just the idea that this one man can go into the property and kill 4 people with a knife.
Silently.
It hasn't had the ring of truth. I could be totally wrong because I don't know. I wasn't there. All of that's true, but it doesn't have the ring of truth that one person goes in there and doesn't know any of them, and he just murders 4 people. That can't be the story. And there is more to the story. It's just that at this time, we don't know what the story is.
Yeah, and one of the elements, to this case, and if anybody's watching who isn't familiar with this case, is like, oh, like how can they even connect this person? One of the evidences that was found was like the sheath of this knife with his DNA, obviously. So that's one of the things that connected him. Another interesting fact is he was pursuing a PhD for criminal
Criminology.
Yeah. So it's a scary thing because you think of this person who already has a degree related, to these studies and sciences. But it's also very interesting to me that he would even leave a piece of evidence like that behind. But then on top of that, very, very strange. Two roommates alive. One of them allegedly saw a masked person. Who sees someone with a mask and lets them into, like, just doesn't do anything?
One of the theories was that, well, it was a party house. It's college kids. They had a lot of parties. The police had been there. So when Dylan Mortensen saw this guy going out, well, if you live in a party house and people are coming and going, you don't really know everybody. So they kind of excuse her for that. But again, it doesn't really have the ring of truth. There's more to the story. There was another supposition early on that it was partially proven, but then the gag order was extended out to them. There was a restaurant in the town that apparently one of the girls worked at, and Mr. Kohberger was said to have been a patron there, and maybe he liked her a little bit more than the waitress customer relationship, and maybe he, had a thing for her, or maybe he was a stalker of her. All of that is wild speculation. I'll agree to that, but that's what we're left to. There's a gag order. I would certainly implore everybody in the news media, because I do know a lot of people. I used to be in that business. I would agree 100% with the judge that people have to be respectful of the process, and people need to understand that there has to be decorum, and people need to understand that the proceeding and the seriousness of purpose of the proceeding needs to be respected. But again, it's a public proceeding. It's a public courthouse, and the public certainly has a right to know, especially if many people, not just me, have said this couldn't have been carried out by one person, and that would mean that there's somebody else out there, and there's going to be fireworks at the trial. That's all I can say. And if we're left to only have the old-fashioned courthouse sketcher in them, that's not going to do it for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And it's like 4 people with a knife. And you mentioned that the customer, like, waitress relationship there, and that maybe it turned into a little bit more of an infatuation. There's a Netflix series called You. I don't know if you've heard of it, but YOU.
No.
Yeah, it's basically just the story of this guy being a stalker and in love with this girl and like breaking into her house and all of these crazy things, and it goes on like that. And I think a lot of that does resonate with a lot of women, because especially with Facebook, which bless that I don't really use it anymore, but when Facebook first came around, everybody was getting, I don't want to say everybody, but a lot of girls were getting those creepy messages. So that's also probable. But another thing that did come out about with this case is that in the town that he grew up with, there had also been murder. So a part of me wonders, like, how premeditated was this? Was it out of jealousy? Or is this just someone that's fascinated with murder and wanted to see how much he could get away with?
Well, yeah, he had an undergraduate degree, and he was studying for his PhD. He had actually been interviewed by some famous people that had actually written a book about BTK. Something else we can get into in a future episode, which I'm kind of working on behind the scenes. We'll talk about that more. But one of the things that one of the true crime people had said was, one of the people that Mr. Kohberger had read about was Ted Bundy. Now, Ted Bundy, we all know, was back in the 80s, before all this technology that we have now. And he went on a rampage, and he ended up killing people. I forget whether it was 3 states or 4 states: Washington State, Oregon, Utah, and Florida. That's 4. And he got away with it for years. He was actually being tried in one state, Colorado, and he escaped. He got away and went down to Florida. And there was talk about how he was a responsible, respectful guy. He actually was, climbing the Republican local political channels in Washington State. He actually worked for the crime line in Seattle, Washington. He was, by day, he was a responsible, respectful, blah, 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 law student. But then he would go on these rampages where he would go out with his little yellow Volkswagen and pick up women and torture them and kill them. And he got away with it for a long time. And people say, well, maybe Kohberger, thought he was going to be like that. Well, the big difference is that then, in the 80s, there was no such thing as all of these things that got Kohberger. There were cameras that saw his car go back and forth. People could trace his cell phone. None of that existed when Bundy was running around. So maybe Kohberger got a D in that class.
I was going to say, too, it's interesting that he's not aware of things like the tracking in the car, especially if this is what he's studying as a PhD student. I mean, I'm in my second semester or second year of college, and we were already talking about how all cars have little computers in it that are tracking your movement, how fast you're going, and all of that stuff. So that, to me, are the strange standout points about that. But it's also extremely personal to be coming over with a knife. Out of all the ways you could kill someone,
right.
The struggle wounds are interesting to me, because a part of me almost wonders if maybe potentially Ethan could have been one of the first victims, and then as a result Xana woke up potentially, and that's when the defense scrapped happened. Maybe she was collateral, but then you also have these 2 other people who were also murdered, but then you also have 2 survivors. So it is definitely a little sketchy that some people would be okay and that some other people wouldn't. In doing some of the research for this episode, for completely valid reason, I get it. Bethany and Dylan have their social media stuff set to private, which very good, very responsible of them. But at the same time, obviously there is a lot of speculation on them, and obviously these poor girls went through something very traumatic. I can't even imagine, even though we say this where it is weird, these poor people have to deal with the repercussions of all these hundreds of thousands of people coming after them thinking that they're guilty.
Yeah. It's just one of the strangest cases that's come up. People don't understand that, all this technology is out there. They do know, we did another episode on this a long time ago, that they do know where we are at all times. I have to add before we conclude that everything we have said has been about allegations. Mr. Kohberger has been held on a probable cause affidavit, which it went on for 18 pages, talking about this electronic evidence that you're telling us about. But the man is entitled to a presumption of innocence, and we understand that, and we believe firmly in not only the open trial that we've talked about before, but a fair trial. That's paramount, is that he is entitled to the presumption of innocence. All of the things we've talked about are allegations. And do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the only closing thoughts truly that I have is that I think it's understandable that some evidence may be hidden from the public, but I think that it's a little disingenuous to want to hide the entire court case from the public. I think that, as precedence is established, as court cases happen, I think the American people have a right to know how things are handled and how things are addressed. I understand that there's certain elements that may be beneficial to hide, but I do think it is really sad that they're trying to put this block. But all of that being said, thank you guys so much. If you watched up into this point, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on our videos, and make sure to let us know what topics you'd like to hear about in the future. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being with us. Please go ahead and subscribe, like everything that she just said, and have a good one. See you next time around.
Bye.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.